Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Evie and I am the coordinator of the Limerick Women's Network. Thank you all for being with us this evening. We are delighted to be able to bring you this event thanks to support from Our Lady of Charity Ireland Trust Fund at the Community Foundation for Ireland and HSE National Lottery funding. We actually ran this event already yesterday and we received some really great feedback on both the content of the event and our fabulous speakers. So I'm absolutely delighted to be able to run it again online this evening for another cohort of women. So just some housekeeping before we kick off properly. This event has ISL interpreters, so that is Catherine and Shelley. To better see them, you can pin them to your screen. You can do this if you hover over their individual screens. There are three dots on the top right-hand side of their little screen. If you click that, you should get a little option to pin them. There will be a short Q&A session at the end of this, depending on how we go for time. So if you have any questions, do put them in the Q&A box. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you should find the Q&A box there. There will also be, we appreciate this is a long event, so there will be a small stretch break at around 8 o'clock as well. For those of you who might not know, the Limerick Women's Network, we aim to promote gender equality through our work. We're an inclusive organisation and our work is guided by community development and feminist principles. We work with women in a number of ways, through providing supports and information on topics like health services, education, domestic violence, and what women's groups are currently active in the city and county. We organise activities and events for celebration days and events such as Let's Talk About Death, and we run various programmes. We were also instrumental in the establishment of the Limerick Women's Caucus, which was the first of its kind at a local level in the country. So let's talk about death. It really came about through a conversation that we were having about the impact COVID-19 was having on women. We do know that it has had a more profound impact on women locally, nationally and internationally. We do hope to make this a series of events that we will continue with next year. And I'm really delighted just to say to have the speakers again today. We're tight on time, so I am now going to go and introduce our first speaker. So our first speaker is Jennifer Moran-Stritch. Jennifer is a lecturer at the Technological University of Shannon, formerly Limerick Institute of Technology. The focus of her teaching is in personal development, therapeutic group work skills, and loss and grief for the caring professional. In addition to lecturing, Jennifer is the primary principal investigator of the Loss and Grief Research Group, which is part of Social Sciences Connections Research Institute at TUS. She also teaches on the RCSI Irish Hospice MCS in loss and bereavement and is a certified thanatologist and the current Irish representative to the Association for the Study of Death in Society. In 2015, Jennifer co-hosted the first Death Cafe event in the Limerick area, where people gather to eat cake, drink coffee and tea and celebrate our mortality. Welcome, Jennifer. Thanks for being here.
Thanks very much for that, Evie. Now I'm going to risk it all by trying to make sure really all able to. Somebody might give me a shout if you can't, but you should see a couple of images of women and then a nice plate of ham sandwiches in the center. So hopefully everybody has that. Super duper. So many thanks, Evie and the Limerick Women's Network, for inviting me to be part of this panel this evening. It's an honor and a pleasure. And like Evie said, it's something that we've been trying to make happen for the best part of a year, and it's just great that it's finally here and we're getting the conversation going. I suppose I'd like to mention at the beginning that on the following slides, there are some images that show a dying or a deceased person. And I've made every effort to use these images to illuminate rather than intimidate. But I would encourage you to look away if this does not suit. And I will certainly have contact details for organizations which can offer support or more information about anything that I speak about here tonight. And certainly the women that I'm privileged to share the panel with would also be great sources of support and further information as well. As Evie mentioned, I'm a social worker by training, and I've been a lecturer and researcher at the Technological University of the Shannon, formerly known as Limerick Institute of Technology, for 15 years now. This evening, I'm going to speak from the perspective of both as a woman and all of that entails, I think, but also as an academic thanatologist, which is a big, fancy schmancy, multisyllabic word that really just describes somebody who's interested in all aspects of death, loss, grief, bereavement, mourning, funerals, disposal rituals, memorialization, and all of the attending cultural, historical, emotional, practical, and spiritual aspects of these topics. I'm hoping over the next 10 minutes or so to share with you some of my thoughts about death and women, particularly in an Irish context, from the traditional image of the woman who is seen as keening here on the left-hand side of the screen. And that's something that would be very familiar to us culturally in terms of death, all the way across to the woman on the right-hand side of the screen right now, who is this very modern image of a female professional undertaker leading a funeral cortege. And all the while, I argue that we have been bridging the gap between the women who did the keening and the women who lead the funeral industry now by the humble ham sandwich. So I want to explore this argument a little bit by really talking about three concepts that are mentioned in the title of my presentation: the ham sandwich, death doulas, and mushroom suits. First, a small bit more about what a thanatologist is, as it's a term that a lot of people are unfamiliar with. The term thanatologist is derived from the name of one of the Greek gods of death, and in particular, this particular god, or this version of the god of death for the Greeks, was known as Thanatos. He's most often pictured or presented in a masculine form, but he really has a curious and kind of confusing identity in the landscape of the mythology of death, as he had to share the title of the god of death with 7 or 8 other figures in Greek mythology. And these include figures like Hades and Demeter and Cronus and Nyx and Charon and several others, right? I was saying yesterday, it was a little bit like hot desking in the underworld for these folks. But I really like the notion of Thanatos and how Thanatos is described, because Thanatos is described throughout the literature as being relentless, as never stopping, as being omniscient and ever present, and just unstoppable. And I think that that's a very useful, if somewhat intimidating, way to think about death. Thanatos represented the idea that death, whether it was expected and gentle or whether it was sudden and traumatic, was an experience that all humans must meet within their existence. I believe too that our own mortality is relentless, that it happens for us all and to us all, and that loss is inextricably part of our lives from the moment that we draw our first breaths. In fact, we expend a great deal of energy in the days and years that follow that first breath, just trying to deny the reality of death, whether it be the deaths of those we know and love in our life, or in fact, our own certain demise someday in the future. Now, the image on the screen here is one of Thanatos, and I particularly like it because it really shows the kind of gentle aspects of this archetype. Like for me, and hopefully you can all see it too, I think there's a really feminine perspective here. There's certainly, from the Christian tradition, you can see it's the halo, and it's quite saint-like. I think there's also suggestive of some Islamic figures in that. Well, the wings suggest an angel, and one of Thanatos's titles was as the gatherer of souls. And I think that's a particularly beautiful thing that comes out of this image. But, you know, like all of us, sometimes Thanatos has different representations, right? And you can see here on this slide that in the image on the right-hand side of the slide, that Thanatos is pictured here in the form that we traditionally think of when we think of a Greek god. So very masculine, not a whole lot of clothes on, probably spends a good deal of time at the gym, and his protein intake is pretty good, obviously. You can also see the wings, so we have the angel thing happening there. You can see on one side of him, he has a sword in a holster on one hip, so he's almost ready to do battle, right? What you can't see, unfortunately, here, because this bas-relief sculpture has worn away somewhat, is that in his other hand, he would have held a poppy. And the idea being that death can come either swiftly and violently and in rather dramatic circumstances, but equally death can come by just Thanatos holding gently a poppy under your nose, that you inhale its fragrance and then you fall into the sleep that does not end, right? So I really like that idea that death comes in all sorts of forms, but it does come for us all. And my argument for you today is that we as women are the future of death care, and that the presence of women in death is as relentless, but equally as gentle as the representation of Thanatos that you see on the left-hand side of the screen. However, death care is not just in our past and in our it's not just in our future. It is very, very much a part of who we are in our history as women. This is not a new space for us. Our future in this space will in fact be a re-entry or a reclamation of our most central role in all aspects of death care. So first, being the good academic that I am, I can't throw a term out there without defining it for you. So we do need to define what I'm talking about when I talk about death care. And for our purposes this evening, I think we can define death care as any activity, product, or service that is connected to the care of the dying, the deceased, or the disposal of human remains. So this is going to include things like funerals, burials, cremations, memorials, as well as any kind of activity that happens in the final stages of life, whether that's hospice care, nursing care, home and family care. I also think we can look at things like digital memorialization, and we can look at things like legal and estate services. And those are things that other members of the panel will speak to tonight. Those are also parts of death care and end-of-life care. If we look at this from a Western perspective, we can state confidently that women have had a prominent role in many aspects of death care throughout history, with a short gap, arguably, in the West between the years of about 1850 to about the year 2000, so about a 150-year gap in which women maybe took a step back in fulfilling death care. There's a lot of explanations around why women receded in many ways from death. This would be a whole other lecture that I would have to give, so I won't get into it. But suffice it to say that there were industrial and technological developments that happened. Some of them happened in European medical schools about embalming and being able to preserve corpses. And some of those improvements in technologies were used in the American Civil War to be able to transport bodies back home intact and presentable for burial. And this technology was also really important to European migrants who were moving to the United States, because the ability to look upon the dead is very important for us as Irish people, but it's also important for a lot of other European and Catholic influenced cultures. So the techniques of embalming really spread, and this led to a rise in what we would say is professionalism of death care. So it became a business as opposed to a community service. The assassination of Abraham Lincoln also sort of heightened this need for the business of undertakers, and women were really thoroughly excluded from this business by male business owners. In fact, in some trade magazines from the funeral industry in the late 1800s and early 1900s, there are editorials that caution against having female employees in funeral homes, other than for things such as hair and makeup, because women were not seen as emotionally fit for the work, and because the business of bodies required brute strength, psychological fortitude, and a stoic approach that only men could provide. So when we think about ham sandwiches, I would imagine that most of you here with us this evening, you can understand that ham sandwich aspect of women in death, because who among us has not prepared a tray of sandwiches or some other kind of food that you've brought to a removal in a private residence or to provide sustenance after a funeral and a burial, either in your own family or for a neighbor or friend? I would argue that we have all participated in what sociologist Arlie Hochschild defined in the 1980s as the emotional labor of death. The caring, supportive, demonstrative, and expressive activities usually attended to by women. Listening, comforting, caring, making everything work and progress in those most difficult hours following the death of someone and the early stages of mourning. Expressing emotions through words and tears and acts of care, cleaning, cooking, and paying attention are all pieces of emotional labor that are generally carried out by women. These activities can include providing hospitality to mourners, welcoming those who come to express condolences, making important decisions in pre-death arrangements, such as what clothes will be worn, is the house ready for visitors, who will be at the bedside of the dying person, and what personal arrangements and errands need to be carried out. When we consider the concept of intuitive or emotions-based grieving, we can see that this is a naturally feminine space, as are many post-death activities in our culture. So think about writing thank you notes, sending mass cards, arranging for the month's mind and the anniversary masses, sorting through the deceased's belongings, maintaining graves, and even maintaining family traditions. All of these things are part of the feminine arena. So death doulas. In looking at the role of women in death care, I'm struck by the very recent, increasingly popular mention of the death doula. And the death doula can be defined as someone who accompanies the dying person in the last days and weeks of their life. The death doula role mirrors the birth doula, who acts as a support to pregnant women and new mothers from delivery through those first postpartum weeks, providing care that usually falls outside of traditional nursing or midwifery or healthcare. So sometimes they're called death midwives, but death doulas, who, to be fair, are not only women, but, a little bit of research suggests that women are dominating the field and dominating the training of other death doulas. Death doulas can act as a companion or a guide also for the family and friends of the dying person. The death doula can provide a range of services from household errands to direct personal care for the dying person, to therapeutic and culturally appropriate treatments and ceremonies. That's sort of what's pictured here. This is from a Canadian website for a death doula organization. And the woman who's standing up is doing a sound ritual that would be very much part of a First Peoples culture. The rise of death doulas is really happening in Canada and in the United States as a way to sort of avoid the traditional funeral home and the funeral home industry and provide a more natural at-home viewing. However, with regard to death doulas, there is definitely an argument about maintaining the death doula role as a free service performed within communities or performed naturally within families that's rooted in cultural customs, social compacts, and shared beliefs about death. For Irish people, perhaps the concept of meitheal and community connection is at play here. So this ability to accompany others in death and learn what to do when someone is dying is passed down through generations. The other side of the argument, however, wants to make the role of death doulas as a way of protecting vulnerable people from being taken advantage of during a time of illness and death, like a more formalized role. And that's with training courses and certifications and regulatory bodies. And of course, whenever you hear those things, you hear fees and money. This controversy, like so many in health and healthcare, is about who gets a seat at the table. Where do we draw the line between cultural appropriation and bringing beneficial services to people, and the benefits and consequences of monetizing a vital service that does not have to be a medicalized one? So the images that you see here again on the left are from the same Canadian death doula website. The woman in pink on the right is the death doula, and she is supporting and comforting these two women who are sisters who are at the bedside of their dying mother. She's almost leading them through what to do, how to speak to her, how to be with her. Again, that's because we have grown unfamiliar with death. So she's being paid to do that. But if you look at the image of the woman on the right, the image of the woman on the right is a woman who 80, 70, 60 years ago was providing this service quite freely and quite naturally within her own community. And I know this because my mother-in-law taught me about this woman and shared this picture with me. This woman came to my mother-in-law's home when she was a girl because her own mother, my mother-in-law's mother, would have been dying as a stroke. My mother-in-law was the only daughter in the family. She did not know how to prepare this woman for death or how to care for her in the last hours or even prepare the house for what would happen. So this woman, very much a death doula, came in and gave her that support. So are we going professional and only the professional knows how and gets paid for it? Or are we somehow finding a balance between the natural learning and knowledge within our own families and communities? Last concept is mushroom suits. So our attention turns very much towards the future. What new technologies will be developed and what role will women have in them? The image here is of the artist Jae Rim Lee in her TED Talk on the development of the mushroom suit, which she is wearing in this picture. So Lee is selling the notion of mushroom burial suits, which will help to compost the human body and help it to decompose more quickly and with less toxicity, and it's better for the environment in theory. Again, this is a very contested area. Some people don't think that the technology may work in the way that Lee reports, but either way, I think we can see the rise of an interest in green and natural and eco-friendly options in coffins and in disposal as a sign of care for the environment and future generations, and that's very much a feminist perspective. I would also argue that the less is more trend in natural burials and wicker and reed coffins and low impact shrouds and a much more natural approach, and maybe the argument against embalming also comes out of a feminist body positive perspective. And in other words, my body is good and valuable as it is. It doesn't need to be adorned. I don't need to be made to look different. And I certainly don't need to be made to look like I'm alive in death. The last couple of decades have seen a massive upsurge in women enrolling in mortuary schools. We're aware that more and more young women are enrolling in traditionally male-oriented STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math courses. And this is particularly true in forensic science and pathology as well. So it's another way that women are stepping into that death care industry and giving it a feminized future. So where are we with the feminization of death care in Ireland? Well, I'd argue that we are on an upswing. We're moving front and center beyond the tray of ham sandwiches and beyond the sometimes unappreciated emotional labor that we all provide. For example, in the image on the left, the woman at the front of the picture is Mary Caniff, and she's a recent president of the Irish Association of Funeral Directors. The woman in the image next to her is Elizabeth Oakes. You might recognize her from the Tommy Tiernan show. She's a mortician. She was trained in the US. She's now based in County Meath, and she's trying to promote what's called next generation body resummation or aquamation, which will be another option in the Irish disposal landscape. And it's in theory a much greener alternative to cremation or burial. If we did a quick scan of the Funeral Celebrants of Ireland website, which that's the logo of it there, you'd see there's about 25 or 26 funeral celebrants listed there. And of those, 22 of those are women. That's a dramatic change from funerals that would have been led by male members of the clergy for the past 800 years or so. And I run the risk of self-promotion. I see Evie's coming in. I'm almost done, Evie. I run the risk of a little self-promotion here in that, things like death education in Ireland, I think are led a lot by women, including myself, coming from a Death Cafe Limerick perspective. And certainly the other women on the panel tonight will underscore this argument, as will the leadership of organizations like the Irish Hospice Foundation, the Irish Childhood Bereavement Network, and many palliative care services and advocacy and planning organizations. So the future of death care is decidedly feminine, but I argue that its present and its past is also in the shape of women, right? We are all part of it to greater and lesser extents in some ways that are so comfortable to us that they are second nature, and in some ways that maybe we need some re-reminding of to re-remember the innate knowledge that we have and have had for generations about what is right for us, our families, and our communities in death, dying, and grieving. Whether it's the ham sandwich, the death doula, or the mushroom suit, our natural care, concern, honesty, and bravery as women is at the very center of all we do in life and in death. I look forward to hearing from the rest of the panelists and hopefully some good conversation and more chats from everybody who's with us tonight. And thank you very much for your patience and attention.
Thanks a million, Jennifer. And again, if anyone does have any questions, please do put them in the chat box down below. So our next speaker is Rebecca Lloyd. Rebecca is the Public Engagement Officer for the Irish Hospice Foundation. Her mantra is that every one of us carries both wisdom and worries and can ask for and give help in equal measure. Coming together to talk about our worries and to share in our wisdom is crucial in making better and more productive communities and societies. Rebecca has a Master's of Science which concentrated on talking with non-medical professionals' experiences when managing the dying and bereaved. She believes we have not yet scratched the surface of what people can do to help and support each other. Rebecca hosts cafe conversations, workshops, and talks around the country to encourage people to talk a little more openly about dying, death, loss, and bereavement in a safe space. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you, Evie, and hello everyone. I hope we're all okay. As Evie said, I'm going to talk to you about planning ahead. I work for the Irish Hospice Foundation, and prior to working for the Irish Hospice Foundation, I worked in Milford Hospice and Care Centre. And everything I've done for probably the last 10 years is talking to people about planning ahead. So why change it? So I'm going to talk to you about planning ahead. So this genuinely has become almost my battle cry. And like Jennifer said, women are really, really instrumental in the hospice movement. And especially Dame Cecily Saunders, who actually set up the hospice movement. And she said, how people die remains in the memory of those who live on. So I want you to kind of keep that within you when I'm talking today, because sometimes we think talking about death is so very difficult, but we also need to remember talking about death actually makes the people that will miss you after you die, it'll make their life a little bit easier as well. So we're just going to start with a little poem about the elephant in the room. So there's an elephant in the room. It's large and squatting, so it's hard to get around it. yet we squeeze by with, how are you? And I'm fine. And 1,000 other forms of trivial chatter. We talk about the weather, we talk about work, we talk about everything else except for the elephant in the room. And this is what talking, in my perspective, about dying, death and bereavement is like. Sometimes we find it so difficult that we try and avoid it. But in our avoidance, we just go into this trivial. And it's funny because some research has just been done, and about 76% of people say that they're okay to talk about it. So that's 2/3 of us are okay. So every death has a story, and I truly believe, when I worked in Milford, the head of social work, a guy called Jim Rattigan, he used to say to us, unless we can go and feel death ourselves, unless we have an experience that we can talk about it, and it doesn't have to be a totally personal one, but unless we can kind of feel that sorrow, it's very difficult for us to be able to help anybody else. So I'm going to tell you about my story about death and dying. So this beautiful lady, the older I get, the more I'm morphing into my mum. So this is my mum, Christine, and you might notice from my accent that I come from the north of England. So I come from Yorkshire, and in Yorkshire we are all taught from a very early age how to mix cement, and that's what my mum's actually doing here. She's mixing cement, and we're building a wall. So we're building a wall in my sister's garden. And this is about, I think, about 17 years ago. And you can see it's a bit grainy because it's actually a proper photograph, not a digital one. And here's the second photograph. Again, she's very beautiful, but this was taken a couple of days before she died. So unfortunately, my mum had motor neuron disease. And when she was diagnosed, they said to her, we all know the end of this story, but you can either read it a page at a time, or a chapter at a time, or you can just get to the end of the book, but we all know what the end of the book is. So again, we're kind of talking about the flipping elephant. Motor neuron disease, as you all know, is a terminal progressive illness. And kind of as part of that, we never spoke, because in a lot of respects we were all firefighting. We were dealing with the grief of having someone that we love with a terminal illness, number one. And then the second one was we were actually just dealing with her illness and dealing with the ramifications of that. So we didn't really talk about it until probably the day before she died, and unfortunately her neck stopped working. So we had to hold on to her forehead to keep her head upright so she could breathe. And she said at that moment, I'm going to die. And I kind of said, oh. And she said, yeah. And I said, are you scared? And she said, yeah. And I said, oh, again, I wasn't very good. And then she kind of was a bit quiet, and she said, no, I'm not. And then she went to hospital, and she was put on oxygen. And about 4 o'clock in the morning, my dad called me. I was in our house. I had a baby at the time. And he said, they're telling me to switch your mother's machine off. And then he said, I'm making a decision for your mother to die. And I said, no, you're not. The motor neuron disease did that. So that was, again, a very small conversation about death. And she died that night. And, that was it. And we buried her in all her jewellery because she didn't leave a will. We never spoke about it. And my father said to us, I gave it to her. I didn't give it to you. And he wasn't being mean. He was just being honest. She hadn't bequested any of her things or anything like that because we never talked about it. So anyway, it works. So these ladies are showing the passage of time. So about 1.5 years goes past, and my dad meets somebody new. And there's a theory that men replace and women grieve, and that's probably selling men a bit short, but my father met somebody new, and in his words, he said she was an addition and not a replacement. So this new lady came into our life, and she moved in with my dad, and I got married shortly after. And then You might wonder where this is going. And then this program came on, and I hope you all recognise it. So Bake Off started, and I decided, oh my God, I'm going to become a baker. So I phoned my dad up. I said, Dad, where's the Kenwood? Can I have it? Because I'm going to become a baker because I'm after watching Bake Off. And this Kenwood that my mum had was a super duper one. It had the mincer on, and it had the whizzer, I always forget the name, the liquidizer, and it had all the jigs and reels and everything that you needed. And the silence down the phone, and my dad said, oh. And I said, what do you mean? Oh, it's in the kitchen cupboard. And he said, no, love, it's not. He said, I'm after giving it to his new wife's daughter. And genuinely, and I still am all this time later, I was so cross. I had to actually put the phone down on him, and he's my dad, and I love him, and it's only, and my husband, I was so upset, and I cried, and my husband said, I'll buy you a Kenwood, and so many people said they'll buy me a Kenwood, but that's not the point. The point is, it wasn't actually about the Kenwood. It wasn't about, my dad marrying someone else. It was about the fact that my mum had died and we'd never spoken about it. That was what it was all about. And this is my mum's gravestone, and you might be wondering where this is going, but again, it's about conversation. So my dad bought a double plot, and he said when he dies to take off the lovely, like they're poppies, you can't really see them, but they're poppies, and the lovely little poem at the bottom, take all that off and then put both of their names on it. So that's what he said he'd want. But now he's married again, and he's been married for, a long time, like 15 years. He was married to my mum for 40 years. And now he's been married for the second time for 15 years, a long time. And long may it continue. But what happens when he dies? And again, there's someone that talks about death and dying every day. I haven't talked to him, even though I should. So I'm kind of imploring with you, think about what happens after you die, because even though it doesn't seem important at the time, it actually really is. So, and this is the thing, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion it has taken place. So if you ask me, my brother, my sister, my dad, my stepmom, are you good at communicating? We'll all be like, yeah, we talk all the time, we've got a WhatsApp group, we do all of this. But are we really having serious talks that we need to have? So I just quickly, now Jennifer's covered a lot of this, I just want to talk about the Irish in death. So, if you talk to anyone worldwide, they say, yeah, the Irish are brilliant. And I really did try to, I don't know if you've seen those photographs that they take all the men out of. So, there'll be no one carrying that coffin, but I couldn't find a photograph of women shouldering a coffin. But here's the women, and I don't know why they're coloured and why they've all got the same clothes on. Anyway, there's people who say, oh yeah, the Irish are great at death. They're really good at it. We've got loads of rituals and rites associated with death, which is true. And they have been passed down for generations, as Jennifer said. There's some really good examples, and here's the wake. That, and especially I live in Tipperary in Killaloe, so we've got these lovely traditions of people digging graves and people bringing the ham sandwiches over and communities coming together over after death. So yeah, we're really good at that. And here, as I say, this is where I live. You might be familiar with the main street in Killaloe, and this is the queue for Anthony Foley's funeral. Everybody coming to pay their respects. And again, if you took all the men out, it's interesting, isn't it? But the converse is that men are very misunderstood when it comes to grief and bereavement. But I think what's interesting again is that people did come out, and people do come out, and it's something that we are good at. But in 2016, we asked the Irish public, so we asked them a few questions. Do we do death and dying very well? And they told us some stories. So what Susie said was, actually, I don't think we do, because we haven't learned to have a conversation. Her father was dying, and she wanted to tell him that he was dying. And her siblings and her mother didn't want that to happen. And I often find this a very difficult subject, because I have quite strong views on this. I think if somebody's dying, why would anybody take away the final gift of being able to say, I'm sorry, I love you, I forgive you, why would we ever take that away from anyone? And in the 10 years that I've spoken about death and dying, I've never known anyone to say, yeah, I don't know, I don't want to know. If I'm near death, don't tell me. I've never known that. So I think sometimes we try and protect people when it's probably not, maybe not the right thing to do. And then Mary worked in the milk market, and she wanted her and her siblings wanted her father to die at home. And unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. And he was rushed into hospital, and they were in a crowded ward with a curtain around them. And her father was just about to die. And just at the last minute, she went to talk to a nurse and say, you know, there's only one of us here. We all want to be with him. And because she'd had the courage to go and talk to the nurse, they got a room. They managed to transfer her father to a room, and all the siblings could come in and say goodbye, and he had the death that he wanted. So sometimes it's about speaking up. And then Stephanie, lovely Stephanie. She went to work one day, and she brought her little boy into creche, Patrick. And unfortunately, Patrick died of sudden infant death. And Stephanie's message to the world was, please keep on saying his name. Don't pretend that he didn't exist. And she said the worst thing was when people didn't speak about him. Remember his birthday, remember the anniversary, remember everything, and remind me that he lived. And, you know, it was profound. I found Stephanie's story. So people also said, you know, I want to die with as little fuss as possible in my own bed with my people around me. And, you know, the fear, will I end up a number on a chart in a cold and care, in an overcrowded, noisy institution with overworked staff and under-resourced facilities? That, you know, these fears are real. It's not what we want. So if we don't want it, we need to start using the tools that will help us write down what we do want. So this is Think Ahead. Hopefully I think you've all got one. If not, you can go get one from the Irish Hospice Foundation website. But it's what's called advanced care planning. So it's planning for our future. So to think, talk, tell and record what's important to us in case we become ill and after our death. Prepare for a time when we might not be able to speak for ourselves through illness or accident, and nominate someone to act on our behalf. But also it's a really, really good signpost. So in Think Ahead is something called an Advanced Healthcare Directive. And they are actually, by law, you can refuse treatment. So you can say, I don't want DNR CPR, do not resuscitate, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, don't do that to me. If I'm at the end of my life, don't do that. And it's also, if you're at the end of your life and you can't speak for yourself, or if you're incapacitated by an illness such as dementia, you can actually choose someone to speak on your behalf. And they can say, actually, they don't want that to happen. So who would that person be? And I think this is really important. Choose someone you trust and respect and love, enough to be your voice. And that's the key. They are your voice. They're not making decisions on your behalf. They're making your decisions. And I think that's a crucial differentiation. They're just communicating what you cannot communicate. So I think planning ahead is a really positive action. It reduces stress and anxiety for families, and it can reduce unnecessary and futile treatments, especially at the end of life. So what I want you to think about, say I live near Loch Derg, or if you're on the Shannon, that you're in a boat, and you know these two ladies in the boat here, they can make decisions whether they want to go left or right, forward. They can chat about that. Where will we go next? And actually planning and thinking at this point in time is relatively easy. Oh, we'll go over there, we'll do this. That's relatively easy. This is not. This is when you're in the white water, you can't make decisions. And anybody who knows when they've been in a hospital environment with someone that is ill, you can't make decisions. You are making decisions on the hoof. You are trying to, I don't know what to do now. I don't know what to say. But the thing is, if you've had a chat before, even if you've had a chat in the car, and if somebody has tried to write some bits and bobs down, you're much, much more prepared. So where we die matters, or it does to most of us. And actually where we die isn't where we say we want to die. So the majority of us say, I want to die at home. And that actually doesn't happen. The majority of us die in a hospital, and an acute hospital, or in a nursing home. So again, there's this lovely story about a Tipperary farmer, and he had a think ahead farm. It was piloted in Limerick and Tipperary. And he said he was in the hospital, and he said, I have that green book. And everybody looked at him blankly. They had no idea what he was talking about. And he got the book. It was wrapped in bungee cards in a fertilizer bag, and he pulled it out, and in the center of it he'd just written, I want to die at home with my cows. And he was a bachelor, he had no children, and guess what happened? He actually died at home with his cows because he'd said what he wanted. So again, it's about saying what you want. So think about the why. Why should I tell people what's important to me? Why should I talk about dying? It makes me really uncomfortable. And the first thing is, it's kindness to others. And again, having a conversation before a crisis, it's really invaluable, and it's a lot easier to have. And it also helps somebody, if they need to speak for you, they know what you want. So, think ahead. It helps you keep control of your care, receive the care you want and not the treatments you don't. Give your loved ones peace of mind, not tough choices. Give the nominated person the ability to make the decisions you'd want, and really have those conversations about the things that are important to you. And lastly, the last place you want anyone having a family row is around a deathbed. So, and I think we really need to up our language, the way that we communicate, especially with healthcare professionals, because we say this, do everything that you can. Because guess what? None of us want our loved people to die. So if someone we love is in the hospital, do what you can, do everything you can. But I'm not sure we actually mean that. I think this is what we mean. Do everything that you can that will not cause suffering or harm. And that's the key. It's learning this language. So if someone hasn't written something down, that's what you say. Not do everything you can that will not cause suffering or harm. Because at a certain point, if you still have your marbles and you're not faced with a serious financial challenges, you have a chance to put your house in order. And putting your house in order, if you can do it, is one of the most comforting activities. And the benefits of it are incalculable. So that was the great Leonard Cohen. So just, if there's one thing I really would like you to take away today, it's being a companion. This is what we all should be. And this is actually bereavement, but I think it works in everyday life, especially when we're talking about dying and death that we might find uncomfortable. And it's about curiosity, not expertise. It's about learning, not teaching. We walk alongside, we don't lead. Practice being still and not racing forward. Discover the gift of silence and don't fill the moment. And listen with the heart, don't analyse with the head. And bear witness to the struggle and the pain. Try not to direct and solve. And being present with pain and not taking it away. So it's like, I just think they're such words to live by. Because talking about death won't make it happen. But not talking about it robs us of choices and moments that will not come again. So
happy birthday, Faye.
Sorry.
Mickey's coming, Faye.
Don't know what that noise is. So the goal of today's little talk was to just try and make that elephant a little bit smaller. And I hope I've done that. And the only way you can do that is by talking. So we've got some great resources on our website. Conversations with a couple are really good. They're just little prompts that if you do need to talk to somebody, whether you're ill or someone that you love is ill, you can do that. And we've got a bereavement support line. It's open 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, and it's 1800 80 70 77. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. Our next speaker is Sharon Caher. Our family protecting your family is the tagline for Caher and Co solicitors who have been servicing families for over 45 years. Sharon Caher, working as a solicitor in the area of wills succession for over 25 years in a family law firm, qualifies Sharon to be an authority in the area. Sharon's speciality is in the area of wills, both making and contesting, succession planning, and dealing with deceased estates and managing family conflict are all intertwined with many of her cases. In addition to being a solicitor, Sharon is a qualified mediator, a certified values leadership coach, a co-author of the book Success University for Women, and she's an accomplished speaker and regular speaker empowering women to lead forward in their families. Sharon is a strong advocate for seniors to be more prepared for the third act and champions leaving a legacy of harmony, not hurt. Welcome, Sharon.
No, I think I'm live. Camera action live. Thank you. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here this evening, and I suppose it's women speaking to women, but really advocating for the voice that women have in planning ahead and planning within their life and planning for a time that's gone to care for families. So today, the biggest opportunity for me is to reverse engineer my talk and talk about well-being, talk about wealth, and then ultimately, when we're gone, ultimately it's our wills that will speak for us and what we want to do. So today, in the time that's allotted, I'll start my timer. Really, the secret is about just starting. This is a whistle-stop tour this evening of why we would put a will in place, giving some more education in relation to why you might consider it. Perhaps you have a will and you might be considering changing it or updating it, or why would you consider it at all, making one or updating one? And I think the biggest message I would have today is this is just the first step. If you haven't done it before, then the information I'm giving is just the first step to begin to think, what's the next step? And literally the first step is going to be the most important one here. So again, what's, wealth? So when people think wealth, so often people think about, I don't know, $1 million, winning the lotto. So often, would you agree with me, that people just go, sure, I don't have much, it hasn't got to do with me. Sure, why would I be making a will? They are very often the sentences that I would hear, particularly when I'm out and about, speaking. It tends to be a phrase, whether people believe it or not. Wealth is anything more than a 5 or a 10 in your account. If you go, then the last shroud has no pockets. You cannot bring it with you. So therefore, what will you do with what you have left? So what is your wealth? What have you got? Where is it located? There's some of the questions we're going to explore. The same thing in relation to wisdom. We all have wisdom. We know we should make decisions, and we know we can make better decisions. So again, to rely on our gut feelings to do it. Equally so with wellness. We may be well inside on our lifetime and we live much longer, but what can we do and put in place that will support us for someone to make decisions on our behalf if we're not cognitively well? Because if we're talking about when we're gone, we should start talking about what if we can't operate in the same way we can when we're cognitively well? What if somebody needs to step into our shoes and manage our finances, manage our assets, makes decisions for our care? Then perhaps there's better decisions we can make in our lifetime. And some of those will follow on then when you're gone. Who will be the people that will step into certain roles for you after you've passed away? So when we talk about wealth, and Rebecca spoke about the form that the Irish Hospice Foundation have, and it's really important, and all of you have it. I'm trying to look at the page number. There is a page about law and legal, but actually the page after the legal is about financial. That's where I tell you to turn in the book and the aid that you have from the Irish Hospice Foundation, because it speaks about what do you have? What accounts do you have? Do you have policies? Do you have 5 prize bonds from when you made your Holy Communion? Do you have 3 prize bonds because your aunt gave them to you on your 21st birthday? That's all assets, and that all contributes to the wealth that you will leave behind. So what I'm challenging you to do is see wealth as anything that you have, that if you haven't spent it in your lifetime, then what is it that would be left that you need to think about distributing after you're gone? So again, pensions, death in service benefits that can be paid out. You may have a farm. There may be agricultural assets you should consider. There may be a business, and you may not have succeeded in passing on the business during your lifetime. So what wealth that you have at any stage in your life, you should keep, I suppose, checks and balances. At any stage in your life, that will be different. It may be going up, it may be going down, but either way, it can be a moving target. And my recommendation is you just keep an eye on it. In relation to wisdom, this is really important today. When I talk about wills and I talk about putting your house in order, it's very much in relation to knowing who are the family, what do you have, who do you want to give it to, Could there be any issues that arise that you could or should talk out in advance? So again, with wisdom, I would challenge everybody to think, do you or anybody you know, are they aware of any family disputes? Any disputes that have arisen when somebody has passed away? And has there ever been a time you've been involved in a conversation where perhaps somebody has said, God, if only they had organized their affairs. It's a pity they didn't do X. So I'm here to remind you all that you have an innate wisdom and you have a gut feeling that if you leave things undone and not organized, and if you don't leave clarity, then you can set a situation where there's more conflict than there is calm in family. Hence the importance to consider your own wisdom. And also I would say this evening that as women, you may not have the same view as your partner. You may be married, you may have a cohabiting spouse. If you're single, you may also worry about what people would think. What should I do? This is expected. So again, you know in your heart and your soul, your innate wisdom, what is the right thing for you and your circumstances, for those people that you want to provide for. What is it that you need to put in place? Wellness. Again, if we're talking about death tonight and preparing for death, it's important to recognize we're all living much longer. And the longer we live, it can be that we get ill. The longer we live, we may not be thinking of things other than Alzheimer's and dementia, but a slip, a trip, a fall, a car crash, all of those things can impair us cognitively. So why wouldn't we consider putting an enduring power of attorney in place? Why wouldn't we consider putting a document in place whereby you can nominate somebody to deal with your finances and to make decisions for you, primary care decisions, health and welfare decisions? Why wouldn't we put that in place? If we're talking about being organized after we're gone, then I would challenge you today to say it's nearly more important while you're alive that you're very clear about how you would like to be cared for, who you would like to access your finance to look after you. And equally so, as Rebecca had said earlier, making decisions and having conversations isn't easy. There's nobody on the panel tonight going to say, this is really easy. We've done this so long. We can definitely have these conversations easier than everybody else. It's not. They're uncomfortable decisions. But what you resist persists, and we all know that. So perhaps these are the conversations that need to be raised to the surface and talked about with families so that we make our families more aware of what we want. So why is it really important in death to make a will? Well, I would say primarily because it gives a roadmap, it creates a framework, and it gives clarity to what you want. Because how often have we heard people saying, Mammy wanted this, our daddy always said he'd do that. Oh, Auntie Mary said she'd never do that, because everybody believes they know us best. And we all know what we want much, much better than everybody else. So why not tell people? And before you die, when you make a will, it will set out very clearly what your wishes are. You'll be planning ahead and setting out what it is that you want and your wishes, rather than making the law step in to make a decision for you. I like to say, do you want to leave a legacy of harmony or hurt? Not making a will means the law will make a decision. It leaves room for ambiguity in relation to what people thought they were getting. They're not getting. It may leave something very different than what you had intended in your life. So starting to think about putting a will in place just makes sense. You might be here this evening and you've made a will and you're considering, will you review it? Will you update it? What things should you take into account? Well, the importance of making a will, I would say everybody should have a minimum of 3 wills in their lifetime. Why? 1, because you're single. Maybe you've got very little, single, you have a house, 2 houses. You may be married. You may be married with children. You may be divorced. You may be separated and living with somebody cohabiting now, and you both got families. Every age and every stage brings something really different. And that's the importance of considering at every stage of your life. What is it that you should have in place at any given time if we were taken prematurely? It is easy if we're told we're going to be gone. And if we're told we have a defined lifetime, we can know that we're going to go. But for the majority of us, we don't know the day, nor the hour, nor the date. We should have something in place where we take it prematurely to provide for our families in terms of putting clarity there. And why is this important this evening for us women? Well, if we think about what we leave behind, if you were back in the 19th century, you wouldn't have anything in your name at all because the law didn't allow that. A husband had to have everything. So any dowry that would have passed between families, the man got it, it was in his name. In 1882, it became a little bit better. Women were allowed to contract apart from their spouse and to have property in their own right. And in 1957, it was made a little bit easier. Women could have debts and could sue in relation to their debts, or could follow their husband for debts or their ability to sue. But also we were getting closer to having property in our own name, having rights. But all of that is not too long ago. A huge piece of legislation, and this is one of the biggest parts for tonight, was in 1965, the Succession Act came. What was important about it was that it set out very clearly when somebody dies, what would happen. One, if they had a will. Number two, if they didn't have a will. And it gave rights to spouses. It gave potential rights to children if they wanted to make a claim. And it was very clear about what the succession rights of beneficiaries are with and without a will. And it is a piece of legislation that has stood the test of time in relation to deciding what can happen. It's the piece of legislation that single-handedly each judge will use for every case that goes before him to help him interpret the legislation for wills that are contested or decisions that have to be made to support the administration of estates. And lastly, a huge piece of legislation in 1976 supporting spouses, so that I suppose the reason the Act was brought in was that primarily back in the 70s, men may have been more the bread earners and have property, but no property can be sold by either party of a marriage couple where a spouse hasn't signed off and consented to it, primarily the family home, because once upon a time that was easy. So tonight when we talk about death, and we talk about planning ahead, we're talking, one, we'll have assets. We as women will have assets in our name. We will own something. But what's really important to consider, and I would ask you all to really consider this particular quote, because the really key thing here is each of our families are perfectly imperfect. And what arises when conflict arises during succession, it tends to be the family relationships. So what's really important is to consider succession in the vein of understanding who's in the family, what could happen. Would somebody fall out with somebody else? Could I give a piece of property to 2 or 3 people? How would they share it between them? Would one really want it? Would one buy the other out? Would one want it for less money than the other because they're all three children equally getting something? It seems odd for me to be speaking in those terms, but that's the reality of what happens. And I know if we were sitting in a room together, I'd be asking you all to put your hands up and to say, would anyone agree with me? And I know all the hands will shoot up because everybody has a story in their community. Everybody has a situation where they'll know of somebody else that has had a difficulty with succession and with wills. And why am I so passionate about this? I'm passionate about it because I'm doing it for 24, 25 years. But the firm that I'm in was started by my dad when he was in his 30s. Therefore, if he had a client that was his same age 45 years ago, then that shows over the years that what I'm meeting is more and more families where somebody has passed away, they have a will with us, but very often what it is mediating family conflict in a situation where there hasn't been clarity. Perhaps people have chosen not to do wills. People haven't updated their wills for what assets they have at any one time. And perhaps there's situations where people have children within their marriage, but maybe they have excluded or not chosen to share that they've had other children. There's a myriad of stories. But the reality is, if we plan ahead, if we think about what we have and what we want to do with it, then we can be more prepared and have clarity for our families. So why am I saying it's really wise to make a will? Well, if you look at the word succession, it's about succeeding. Who would succeed to our assets? What decisions do we have to make? And how can we set a will where we're being specific in bequesting certain assets to certain people? We're being general about some assets, if that's what we wish to do. And if we're choosing to exclude people, and it does still happen that spouses wish to exclude another spouse, then it's important to understand that the legislation will say you cannot exclude a spouse and they will have a right and entitlement to a 1/3 share of your estate if you're married and there's children, or 1/2 if you're married and there is no children. So again, what's success to you in creating a will and making a plan for when you're gone? Will you die testate with a will or intestate? To die intestate is that you haven't completed a will. There will be an administration of your estate and the law will decide where do your assets go. And there is a specific order set out in the Act as to who will inherit your assets. For example, if you're a single person and your parents are still alive, they will inherit everything from you equally between them. If one of your parents is still alive, they will inherit everything. If neither of your parents are alive, it will go between your siblings and they will share it equally between them. But if one of your siblings is predeceased you, then the children of that sibling will share the share of their parent. So, this legislation is really clear. If you don't make a will and decide who is to get what you have, then the law will decide. The best of what it can do is say, I want to give what that person had. They don't have a will anymore. We will pass it as per next of kin. Who is next? And that's what it is, next. If you make a will, you decide where your assets are to go. And you can leave it to the dogs or cats home. You can leave it to the local Franciscan friary, or you can choose whether to leave it to friends or your family. You can choose whether to leave it to some of your family or all of your family. You get to decide, and it's your wishes that will prevail. What's really important when you're making a will is I like to draw the picture, in your mind, if I can, of a chessboard, is because it is like pieces on a chessboard. Who is it that you have in your family? Who do you wish to provide for? Perhaps who do you need to provide for? You may have a more vulnerable child or adult in your family that you need to make provision for. And how can you do that without impacting the rights and entitlements they may already be receiving from beyond you, perhaps the state? What are the relationships of people to you and to each other? What is it that you have to give to those people? And are there legal rights and relationships? For example, the legal right share that I've spoken about already. What are the specific rights that you must know about when you're making your will, even if you choose to ignore them and leave it until after you're dead if somebody wants to opt to benefit from your will, even if you have excluded them? What's really important is that if you make a will, you give a level of clarity. Without the clarity, there's conflict and there's contention. You very often hear that people saying the lawyers are the winners. It's the truth. We are the winners because we are the people at the steps of the court. When there's two sides, very often it's not about the value of the asset. It's about the relationship between the parties that are left. And that's the reason at the outset, I really champion the wisdom that you know who are the people in your life that you want to benefit. And you know in a situation that if you don't make a will or you don't make it clear what's going where, then there would be contention. So why make a will? Well, I've covered that. You would make a will to make sure that your wishes prevail. You will make a will, and my recommendation is you will make a will with a solicitor or a will writer, an experienced person, one who will know the law, but more importantly, make sure the will is constructed in a way that it's not going to fall foul or become invalid because it wasn't created correctly. Who can make a will? It's really very simple. Once you're over 18, once you're of sound mind, and you understand the nature and the context of the document that you are making, which is a will. It's really straightforward, so it's not hard. Everybody can make a will. And what's also worth saying at this juncture, because you often see it in the media, how much is it to make a will? How expensive will it be? The reality is making a will generally shouldn't cost you more than €200. Now, my colleagues, if any of them are listening, I apologise if their wills are more, but what I will tell you is a simple will shouldn't cost you more than €200, and that probably includes the 23% VAT. Certainly on the West Coast. If you're over, head towards the city, yeah, maybe a little bit more, but definitely that, or up to €300. The closer you get to the West Coast, possibly the cheaper it is. Our time is probably less valuable in some ways, or maybe we're more organized. But what I would say is, don't let the cost of the will put you off making one. If your will is complex, if it's a trust will, if it's a situation where you have businesses, you have farms, you have division of lands, well, of course, that's going to be more complex and take a lot more time, and there may be tax involved. But by and large, most people, it's straightforward. There's the who, it's what you have, what you want to do with it. And most solicitors are really experienced in making a will, particularly simple wills particularly. And I say simple because most wills should be simple. They shouldn't be made complex, because the more complex a will, the more likely there is to be contention or conflict around it. And so what makes a will, instead of saying what makes a will valid, what makes a will invalid? Well, a will needs to be a document in writing, dated, signed by you, witnessed by 2 independent witnesses. So that won't be one of the beneficiaries. If a beneficiary witnesses your will, that gift will fail. So again, another reason to make a will before an independent person who'll bring an independent witness. So I don't know how many houses I attended during COVID, but I would travel and I'd bring somebody from my office with me. You know, a solicitor will always have either somebody in their office or they will bring somebody. Really important. I've had an experience in the past where, in fairness to the social worker, thought they were doing the right thing. The social worker and the priest both insisted a homemade will be done for somebody, and it was in the depths of the countryside where they called in one of the sisters to sign and witness a will, which meant that the gift was invalidated because she was somebody who's going to inherit in the will. Now there is a workaround, and in that situation everybody disclaimed and stood back out of it. So ultimately the people who were going to inherit, which were family, they all inherited. But none of that complexity and none of the costs that attached to that had to happen. So again, what's really important is making a will and understanding what it is, but having it made right. What's also important to note is that although it needs to be signed and dated, and you're signing it and there are witnesses, is that, for example, there may be somebody who's challenged in writing. There may be somebody that's ill and all they could put is an X. There is a case in Irish history where an X was accepted because the people who witnessed were independent and could all do affidavit of attesting witnesses, that's what it's called in court, to say that it was the person, was actually them, it was their will. They marked X before the witnesses. Equally so in case law, there is a case where there wasn't a date, because the people who witnessed it could do an affidavit to confirm, yes, it was made on that particular date. That was the intention of the person, and that's what they wanted to happen. So not every will fail if the T's are not crossed and the I's are not dotted in the right way. So this speaks for itself. There's very little I have to say, except there are will wars. We've all heard about them. And in fact, what's worse is that we've all seen, certainly over the last 24 months, we have seen where there's been real family acrimony. There has been murder involved. And yes, that might seem at the far end, but it's real. We're reading about it. So again, I can only champion that wills are done. What's some of the terminology? An executor, that'll be you. The executor is the person you will choose. The testator is you. The executor is the person you will choose to step into your shoes and to distribute your will as per your wishes. They will work with the solicitor. The beneficiaries are the people who will inherit what you have, and that's the choice that you have to make. Who are the beneficiaries? For what? Do you need to give that some thought? Is that something simple, as we heard Rebecca talk about the Kenwood machine? Is it your jewellery? Is it the pearl earrings, and is it a bracelet? Is it your set of books vis-a-vis a painting? But the most important thing when you're doing your will is to be very specific. I want to leave the painting in my bedroom to Mary. Well, maybe you've done up your house and the picture in the bedroom is now gone into the kitchen. And so what one is Mary to get? Being specific. Is it the Jack Reacher painting? Is it the Brown series of landscapes from Connemara? Be very specific about what those gifts are, and be very specific about who. So is it just Mary? Mary, your cousin? Mary your sister, Mary your next door neighbour. So who are the people? What are the specifics you want to give them? And being clear avoids conflict. It also avoids a level of challenges, and part of the will is being voided. So that part of your will might be dealt with by intestacy. A charitable bequest, again, I mentioned yesterday, I always mentioned about charities, but really it's infrequent when people are thinking about it, not even €50 on occasion. So it's worth, although we know that people give to charity, it isn't the norm, and that's not my experience. So you can give something specifically to somebody. You can give generality of, I leave all my money that I have at the time that I die to all my brothers. So you can be more general or more specific. Again, a residuary clause. Every will have one of these, or every will should have one of these. This is like a net that would catch over and above. You're giving your bed to somebody, you're giving your jewelry to somebody, you give your money to somebody, you give your red car to somebody. Well, over and above that, you might say, anything else I have over and above that, whether it's in Ireland or abroad, whatever it is, whether it's fixed or whether it's cash, I leave to one person or many people. But it's very important to have it, because if you don't have it, if you have an asset that falls outside your will because you haven't put it in, or because it wasn't there when you were making your will, then it will fall outside your will, and the law will decide what's to happen next. A codicil, maybe you just have a small change to make, and you don't want to rewrite a will and revoke earlier wills you've done and redo a will. You might just want to add a codicil, which is adding to it. I want to add this to my will, this one small thing. My preference is to remake the will, just in case codicils can fail, but you can just make something small. And your last will and testament, although it says it's your last will and testament, the reality is every will is your last will and testament, not because you intend dying the next day, but because if you're taken short and you have a premature death, the last will that you've written and the last dated will is the one that will come into being. Now, I'm not going to lie. Sometimes there are conflicts over that wasn't his last one. He wasn't of right mind. Oh, they put pressure on him. And if it's a situation that there's a successful challenge or contentious matter brought before the court, where the court might see it as fit to invalidate what appears to be the last dated will in favor of the previously dated will, yes, that can happen. So there are times that the last will doesn't stand up, but that would depend on the unique circumstances in each case and why somebody would want to challenge it. And a judge will want to listen to that, hear it, and he'll be very reluctant to overturn a will unless it's very obvious. The jurisdiction of assets. So somebody might be living abroad and in Ireland, and they have an asset in Ireland, they make a will just for the asset in Ireland. Somebody might be living in Ireland and they have an asset abroad. I would say, yes, have a will in the jurisdiction of where that asset is. That's always worth talking about with your advisor, because there are certain things that happen. We've talked about the legal right share, really important to know. And what's really important too as women is our children have no automatic right and entitlement to get anything from our estates. Now, there is a Section 117 application they can bring, and there's lots of criteria that a judge will look at. I call it the Cinderella effect. For example, somebody's kept at home, somebody else, they're all sent off and educated, or somebody, all the rest of them are given assets or a farm, and somebody's given nothing and they're prejudiced in a way. There's lots of criteria that a judge will look at, and solicitors won't take those cases willy-nilly, because the cost of these cases comes out of the estate. It's really important. It's really, really important to consider that carefully. But there are cases, and people do succeed. The rules of intestacy. Again, there's a myriad of rules. Who will inherit in order of importance as next of kin if you haven't made a will? So the reason for making a will is because you decide, you choose who gets what. You can change it all day long. You might give it to Mary 10 years ago, but you don't get on with Mary anymore, or Mary has predeceased. Therefore, you update your will. Don't not have a will is my advice. This is a really key one. If we were in a room together, I'd really stress this. I can't see any faces now, but I definitely need to stress to you, please do homework. In Rebecca's book from the Irish Hospice Foundation, what do you have? Where is it? Do the homework about who do you have? Who do you want to give it to? I call that homework. The Law Society of Ireland, and indeed our own website, would have what we call a personal asset recorder. So you put into that who you are, your date of birth, your children, who the beneficiaries you think they would be. Fill out something that will begin to create a framework in your mind as to what you want to do. Please don't do a homemade will. Please don't do a homemade will. And I laugh and I jest by saying, poor reasons, I always say them, but any bookstore, is they look lovely, they're written in calligraphy, and there's lots of lines and cross the T, dot the I's going on to make it look formal. It is so easy to make a mistake. So easy. And in fact, the story I spoke earlier of the priest and the social worker, it was a homemade will. So there was nothing untoward or unintentional in relation to how it was created and what happened at the end. It's just easy to create them, but it's so easy to make a mistake where your wishes won't stand up. Be clear and specific in relation to your intentions. And most of all, if you're giving an area of your garden, if you're giving your house, if you're giving a site, if there's specific contents in a house or jewelry, be specific. What are they? Where are they? And very easy so somebody can identify what it is. The importance here is that if we as women want to care for our families, if we want to care for our communities, and if we want to shorten conflict, that's telling me my time is up. If we want to lessen the amount of conflict in communities, then we get to make a difference. But we get to think very carefully about the difference that we actually want to make to protect our families. So what will you do? Well, the who, what, where, it's your wishes. So you decide what you want to do and you put it in a will. Review what assets and liabilities you have at any stage of your life. Make and revise your will consistently and make a habit of it. Even if you don't go to a lawyer to change it, just review what you have. What did you decide before? And are there any changes you need to add? I call it an ages and stages review. So never see making a will as one thing and a once off. Always go and talk to somebody. If they're dependents and vulnerable adults you need to talk about, then have that conversation in relation to whether a trust will is needed or something specific. The next speaker, Anne, is going to speak a lot more about the Fair Deal Scheme. But what I'm going to say is when you're making your will, always mention the Fair Deal Scheme. Because if you're passing a property or indeed your family home, then it's important that you maybe think out in advance if something were to arise in relation to the Fair Deal Scheme, whether or not you want the asset to be affected. If there's a choice whereby any debt that might be due for your stay in hospital would be affected. So again, if we're talking, and I thought how better to finish this presentation, but to talk about Beyonce, is that if going forward, we want to step up as women and take the lead, well, planning ahead for our families, planning for our communities, and planning for what will happen to our assets when we're gone, well, the buck stops with us. Thank you. And I hope I've given you information that will assist you this evening or encourage you to take the first step to make your will or revise your will.
Thanks so much for that, Sharon. I'm conscious that it's a kind of a long session, so if everyone is okay, we might take a 10-minute comfort break so you can have a fag, go to the bathroom, make a cup of tea, start your will. You can do any of those things. So we'll come back in about 10 minutes if that's okay.
Thanks, Evie.
Hi everyone, welcome back. So our final speaker is Anne McMorrow. She appears to be having some technical difficulties at the moment. So what we might do is do some of the questions and answers, well, the questions that have come in, if that's okay, if our panelists wouldn't mind jumping back on the screen when they get a chance. I see from the questions, Sharon, you've indicated that there is one or two that you'd like to answer.
Yes, yeah, it would be easier to answer them. There was one about the Think Ahead form. I think the question was if the form would hold up on a legal basis. In relation to the legal aspect of the Think Ahead form, the page is really simple. Have you made a will? Have you got an executor? Where's your will located? So that's what the form does. The page after that then goes, what might you have where? So it's not for the purpose, and it's not my form. So but the form in this particular aspect is not for the purpose of creating a will or writing your wishes or having them signed. So the person's question was, do you think, does a Think Ahead documentation have a legal basis? For instance, is it possible for other family members to disregard it versus a will? A will stand on its own, very clearly needs to be constructed very clearly as to how a will should be done. I'm going to let Rebecca answer in relation to the Think Ahead form, because I think the question may be more about, will the Think Ahead form stand up in relation to the health decisions or the health wishes that somebody wants in the form. What I would say from a legal perspective is that, you know, the legislation is evolving, and the amount of documentation that will come forward in relation to being specific as to what you want, particularly in relation to dying and how you want that to be dealt with. We're at the cusp of huge changes in the legislation going forward. For the moment, anything you create, it can be of more persuasive value than it is in law, depending on what you want to create. And so as a lawyer, I have to say that you should be very clear, sit with somebody and create the documentation so that there is belts and braces with it. But certainly in terms of having the conversation and being clear as to what you want is really important. I don't know if you want to add to that, Rebecca.
Yeah, so I completely agree with my learned colleague. There's a part of the Think Ahead form from page 11 to 14, which is called an Advanced Healthcare Directive, which I quickly described in my talk, which is basically the refusal of healthcare. So in common law, like Sharon said, it is quite complicated at the moment. We are governed under the 1871 Lunacy Act on capacity. So it's complicated, and there's a new law coming in June next year. So we're kind of in this no man's land. But today, if you fill in the Advanced Healthcare Directive and you get it signed and witnessed and you bring it to a doctor or a healthcare professional, it is their duty to act on your wishes. It has been tested in court, and it has stood on its own. Not the Think Ahead, but the fact that people have had advanced healthcare directives. But what's really, really interesting is that healthcare professionals want that kind of information. They want to know what is important to you. So sometimes we get a bit lost in the legality of it all. It's mostly about telling people what your wishes are and having those conversations. And we were talking yesterday about the best place to have them. Like, you know, next time you're all sitting down for Sunday dinner, just say, look, I'm after filling this form in, and these bits are really, really important to me. And I would really appreciate it if you abided by my wishes. Because like Sharon's right, a lot of it is just writing down your wishes and preferences, what's important to you. And that's by far the most important part, rather than, especially when it comes to your healthcare, getting stuck in the legality of it all. Because the likelihood is, if you fill it in and somebody sees it, they'll go, oh, I see there that Rebecca she doesn't want to be peg fed, or she doesn't want antibiotics, or she doesn't want any more chemo. And that's exactly what we should be telling to our healthcare professionals. I've had enough. When is enough? But again, like Sharon said, I would recommend you discuss your Think Ahead with not only your solicitor, but also with your GP or healthcare professional. Because there are some conditions, say like COPD, that you can't ever make the lungs better again, unfortunately. You know, if you've got heart disease, you can't make the heart better again. So you can discuss with your doctor then, actually, you know, would CPR work for me or would it not? So again, it's finding out the information that is important to you and making a decision, because we're all so unique. And that's what gets this also quite complicated, because we are so unique. So you need to find the people within your network and discuss it with them.
Thanks, Sharon and Rebecca, for answering that question. We have Anne in the room now, so we might move on to her her presentation next. Anne, if you are good to go.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. I'm glad to see a few participants stayed along anyway after your cup of tea. Lovely to listen to the other speakers, and indeed yesterday it was fabulous to do it in person. So of course at this hour to thank Evie from the Limerick Women's Network and Jennifer, Rebecca and Sharon who've spoken before me. Now, family life and women's jobs caught up with me this evening, but I'm delighted to be here. My technology isn't working great, so I don't have my screen and my PowerPoint up. But anyway, I'm Anne McMurrough and I'm the manager in the Nursing Home Support Office here, based in St. Joseph's Hospital in Limerick, and it covers all of Limerick, City and County, Clare, and North Tipperary. Any applications from anybody who is living in that area. And actually something I didn't say yesterday, you can apply if you what they call ordinarily resident, which means that you have been living for 1 year or you intend living for 1 year in the country. So we do have applications from people abroad who want to bring people home to the Midwest, and that is quite possible. So the Nursing Home Support Scheme is around since 2009, and it is generally for people over 65 years of age. But in fact, as people know, there mightn't be a lot of places for people, so nursing homes have people under 65 as well, and they are entitled to apply and get state support. So state support is what we offer generally. So the application is filled out, the nursing home support application, and who should fill it out? The person needing care. That's the best person to fill it out if they can at all. And I know the previous speaker spoke about capacity and that, but if they can understand what they're doing, and as Sharon said, an X can mark it if and an explanation as to why is that. But if the person has an understanding, it would be best that they would apply. It's best that they know it's being applied for, that, you know, it's not behind the door and it's for a little while or it's whatever, you know, people have to be upfront and explain. So there are different parts to the process then. Once the application comes in to the Nursing Home Support Office, that triggers us to request the medical assessment. Now, the medical assessment is undertaken if you're at home, it'll be your public health nurse and your GP. And if you're in a hospital, obviously it'll be the hospital nurses, doctors who will complete it. We're very lucky in this area. We have what we call local placement forums, and they happen every week. One in Tipperary, Clare, and in Limerick. So there shouldn't be any delay in your application from that point of view. So everybody, clients, people who want long-term care, have to be deemed by that professional group to need long-term nursing care. So once that is assessed, we then look at the financial side. So while the application is in and while they're looking at the medical, we may have written out to you looking for additional information. So the better the application is filled out, the fairer we can be, and also the quicker the process will be. So it's important that you go down through every part of the form, writing not applicable, writing awaiting information, writing, you know, whatever it is, because that's more helpful for us to ask you for additional information or to ascertain the information from the form. The financial assessment, that's the part we look after. And I suppose just to say in another life, for a lot of my career, I'm actually a nurse, and I worked in St. Camillus on the Ennis Road for many, many years and was assistant director there, and then went on to St. Itis as director of nursing. So I suppose I'm very aware in my current capacity about the situation people are in at home, looking after vulnerable older people. You know, things are coming to the crunch where you're going to have to say, I can't look after her anymore, I can't look after him anymore. A couple who've lived at home together for so long, knowing that one person can't manage at home, you know, it's a difficult situation. And the other situation may be, and it's equally or more stressful, that you may be in the acute hospital, very ill, sudden illness, deteriorating, and it's all about what's your next step, what's your plan. And as everyone before me has been saying, it is a brilliant idea to have a plan. It's most important to think ahead and have thoughts around what your future will be. So from the financial side of point of view, once the form is filled on that, so to give you an idea of how the financial assessment is worked, okay, there are 3 parts to it. So the first part is assessment of income. So whatever your income is, be it that it is your occupational pension, your state pension, any other monies you get from investments, monies from rentals, whatever your income is. So for a single person, 80% of income is assessed. And there are some allowable deductions, and this again is how the form is filled out. So the most obvious one is local property tax, and then health expenses. So if you know you're employed and you're paying your taxes, well, you know, you have entitlement to health relief, tax relief as well. So any things you can get that tax relief on. We can also give some deductions, but less anything that is paid by health insurance. So again, the more information we get in, the more we can do. So that's a single person's income. For a couple then, with regard to the income, it's a joint assessment. And I suppose Sharon has spoken there about the different laws, enactments and that. And, you know, the people we're dealing with sometimes for nursing home care are 80, 90 years of age, and maybe only one person worked outside the home and find it difficult to understand that both people are being assessed. But it is a joint assessment, so all income is put together and the person at home keeps half, and then the other person going into the nursing home, 80% of their income, or 40% of the total income is allowed. Again, the deductions are allowed, so it's important we know about it. So that's the first part for the assessment, income. The next part is cash assets. The bank account, post office account, the credit union account, you know, wherever finances are, prize bonds, state savings. We have to see documentation of all of those. A single person is allowed 36,000 disregard. So the first 36,000 is not taken into account. And for a couple, the first 72,000 is not taken into account. And if you didn't have this much in the bank, the remainder of the 36 or 72 is allowed against your property. Okay. So what's from your cash assets minus the asset disregard, 7.5% for a single person and 3.75 for a couple is assessed. And then the third part of the assessment is your property, so other assets. So your private residence, your home, farm, business, other properties, the land, a site you bought in Kerry long ago, whatever it is, that's accessible as well. So again, for the single person, it has to be valued, and then for the single person, if they haven't used the 36,000 against their cash assets, the remainder can be used here. And other than that, 7.5% of the asset is accessible, and equally for the couple, then 7.5%. Now, the one thing about your house is that it's only in the assessment for 3 years. So there's a cap of 22% of the house to be assessed. So our system will tell us when people are 3 years in, and we automatically remove the house and give an opportunity for review. So once we have this financial assessment done, we write out to you and we tell you what the financial assessment, what you will have to pay weekly. And other things, I suppose I've just turned over my page here now. Transferred assets are another thing, things that are transferred within 5 years of applying. I've told you about the liable deductions. Now, if it was a younger person, there's still a mortgage on the property, that's an allowable deduction of the 3-year cap. And there is also an opportunity to appeal. When we write out with the amount, the client contribution, you're given an opportunity to appeal. But when we have the client contribution, we then, that puts you on the national waiting list as well. So once the care needs assessment, they're on the national waiting list. That's the same for people up and down the country. It's a national waiting list. At the moment, it's a little under 4 weeks, and it's on chronological order nationally. People come off, and if you go in from home to a nursing home prior to this, you have to pay. Equally, just to say, I suppose we're giving state support, so you are making a private arrangement with the nursing home. So it's important that you visit the nursing homes, that you know which one you want to go to. But the other thing is that you know their additional charges. Lots of nursing homes for activities and different things. So while we might write out to you saying the nursing home is €1,000, the HSE will pay 600, you have to pay 400. When you get to the nursing home, there are additional charges. So it's important that you look into those charges. Equally, I suppose if you, just to say, if you assist someone in paying nursing home charges there and you're working, there is tax relief for that. And if the client themselves is paying tax, there's tax relief for paying nursing home support, nursing fees as well, nursing home fees. So, you write into us and tell us you're happy with the decision and you're accepting the state support. So then the conditions of joining the scheme, I suppose, is that if there are any material changes in your circumstances, the office has to be notified within 10 days. Things like the death of a spouse or a partner, an increase or decrease in the income. So if you were renting a property and now it's not being rented, or vice versa. The sale of someone's home. If there was a legal settlement, an inheritance, for whatever reason there's a change in your circumstance, it's important to let us know. So that is the first part of the fair deal process, and it's called state support. And if for the sojourn of somebody in a nursing home, they pay their part to the nursing home and the HSE pays, there's no comeback. There's no one taking your house. That's the deal. You've paid the nursing home, we've paid the state support, and the deal is closed when someone passes. But if when you see the client contribution, you feel it's too high, you can't meet it, and I suppose this was brought in back in the boom when houses were very expensive, so the value of a house might be quite high, but the people living in it may well be living on a pension, so they wouldn't have the cash assets to pay the client contribution. So in this case, you can take out a loan. So obviously, if you take out a loan, you have to pay it back. Now, you can only take out the loan on a property within the state. So you can't take it out on property abroad. And also there has to be title checks and that done, because we find, again, as the previous conversation again, if people haven't their affairs in order, sometimes when you know, an adult child is looking into the situation, the house mightn't have been brought into someone's name. It mightn't belong to the person. It could be shared between 3 or 4 people. So these are things that at this stressful time of needing nursing home care, you're also having to find out about the deeds of the house and find other things. So it is good to have your affairs, you know where things are. You know, if you're the older person, to have taken someone into your confidence so they can, you know, or as Sharon had said, go the road of power of attorney. For the workings of the Fair Deal, at the very least, you would have to be, if someone has reduced cognition, is a care representative. And that can be created through the circuit court. But, you know, the more you've done in advance, the more you've prepared, the easier it will be for you or for the person who's assisting you. You know, it's children, but sometimes it's a niece or a nephew who's trying to help an uncle or an aunt, and it's very convoluted, and people are trying their best to get care and look after their loved ones, you know. So the loan then is on the part of the client contribution with regard to the properties you have. For the house, it's quite easy because it'll only be on for 3 years, so you can work that out. But if it's for a farm or something else, the loan will be out for as long as the person is in nursing home care. So it's more difficult to work out how big the loan would be. The loan has to be normally paid back after death of the client, but it can be deferred by a spouse or by a younger adult that needs care, you know, somebody who needs support. There can only be one deferral, so it's very important that you would just examine the situation if you are looking for a deferral. And then it sits there until that next person passes on, which gives a bit of relief. And in fairness, Sharon again has just spoken about there, but it has to be paid back. There's a lien on the property, so you have to decide, is it going to be from the house or from your cash assets or wherever, but that's between the revenue. That doesn't happen in our office. That's for those left behind to manage. Now, today is a very opportune day to be doing this talk because for the first time since 2009, there has been a major amendment to the Act. And this Act, this amendment has 2 parts. One is simple enough, and it's a very good change, I feel. So if after the 3 years your house has been assessed, if you sell your house, the proceeds of the sale will not be assessed. So this means that, say your house, you sell it for 200,000, you let us know about it, but that will be created as an allowable deduction. So that will be taken off whatever cash assets you have, or equally off if you have other land or property or something. So it's an allowable deduction. So that's a very big change, but it's only after the 3-year cap. If you sell your house before the 3-year cap, the funds are assessed just until the 3-year cap, but they come off at the 3 years. So anybody who has a loved one in a nursing home who did sell their house while in care, they can write to us and we look into the position, but it'll be from today, the 20th of October is the commencement date of that. So that's one part of it. The other part, the other change to the amendment is about farms and small businesses. So this has extended the 3-year cap to farm and small businesses. So in this case, the client must apply for a family successor to be appointed, and the same must be approved by the HSE. The family successor must commit to running the farm or the business for 6 years from the date of appointment. The farm or business must have been actively run by either the client, their partner, or the proposed family successor for at least 3 of the last 5 years. And in this case also, a charge in favour of the HSE is put in place. And this is that if, when we allow a 3-year cap on a farm or a business, if there is any, if any of the conditions aren't being met, we may claw back the money. So there is a charge on the farm, but hopefully that wouldn't have to happen. You know, the family successor has to be a family member, it could be a spouse or whatever. So if anything happens to the spouse, the family successor can change. And after the 6 years, if the conditions have been met, the charge is removed and the house, you know, the charge is removed from the property. So that's really nursing home support. I suppose, you know, it's an overview of the nursing home support. Really, everybody's individual situation is different. So I would say at this stage, you know, think about it. As the others have said, you have to prepare. So depending on who you are, if you think you might have to help someone, maybe have the difficult conversation with them so that you know you can help them when the time comes. And if you're growing in age yourself and feel you might need it, well, confide in someone, let someone know, and, you know, put something solid like a power of attorney or that in place if you feel that's the road you need to go. But the advice of a solicitor or, well, around Fair Deal, you can ring our office. We can have one-to-one meetings. Now we're back meeting people face-to-face and that, and we can give you any advice. It's not something you could apply for far in advance. So there's no point in applying, you know, 2 or 3 years in advance. It's only just about being prepared, thinking about nursing home, letting people know your wishes and tidying up your affairs so that they're easier to deal with. Okay.
Thanks a million, Anne. And I've just realised that I didn't actually read out your introduction. My apologies. So I will do that now for everyone
All right.
home. So Anne McMorrow, Business Manager in the Nursing Home Support Office, Midwest Community Healthcare Organisation. The office deals with all applications for those who wish to apply for state support under the Nursing Home Support Scheme from all of Clare, Limerick City and County, along with North Tipperary. The office is based in St. Joseph's Health Campus, Mulgrave Street, Limerick. Thanks for that, Anne. We might get all of the speakers to come into the room and we can do some Q&A. Again, just to say, if anyone else has any questions, please do put them in the Q&A box and we will get to as many as we can. So a few have come in, and Jennifer, there was one you indicated that you wanted to address.
Oh, that might have been that might have been me clicking the wrong button.
Oh, that's okay.
But can I just follow up just with two things? One is we've been talking a lot about conversations and chats and having the chat and having it at Christmas dinner and having it, you know, at a certain time. And I think that is all, you know, powerfully relevant advice. But like I said yesterday, you know, my argument about this whole topic and really the sort of purpose of the work that I do in death education is that it's beyond one conversation. It is many, many small conversations over the period of a lifetime, starting from really, you know, kind of age appropriate small little moments with children around death and dying and illness. You know, not being too heavy with it, not being morbid about it. It's not, you know, in every conversation, but that we gradually normalize it and kind of build that conversation into our lives, and that we find some kind of a comfort level to have it with many different people in our lives. So I suppose that would be my little addendum in there too. And the other thing I wanted to say is that I didn't get to say that I obviously teach at TUS, Limerick IT, and I'm happy if people have questions or comments or concerns about thanatology or anything that we talked about tonight, that I'm more than happy to speak to them. And I'll put my email address in the chat. And my little moonlighting passion project is death cafes. And they're a form of death education too. And they're also a place where you get to go and eat cake, which, how bad. So we're having one Thursday week, so tomorrow week, as part of the Samhain Festival in Limerick. And I put the link, I think, before for tickets. They're free, but space is very limited. We'd love to see people there. If you want to find out more about it, just go to Death Cafe Limerick on Facebook, or you can email us at deathcafelimerick@gmail.com. But I'll put my work email address in the chat too, in case anyone wants to get in touch. Thanks for that.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Jennifer. Sharon, a question came in here in regards to someone from the deaf community. So would video submissions of a will in ISL be accepted or also included, or is it most preferable to have an ISL interpreter present, excuse me, present and the will in writing instead? They're thinking of vulnerable deaf women who would struggle comprehending the will terminology.
Yeah. And I think, you know, look, a will has to be in writing. There aren't any oral wills, so it needs to be in writing and it needs to be signed, and it's very strict in relation to that. So the solicitor will attend. So again, in this situation, I suppose I'm going to join two questions together. Is it, I would say, in attending with a solicitor, who you bring with you and how that would take place, the solicitor will need to be involved in that, because equally so, you know, the solicitor will need to be very clear as to what the instructions are. Is it clear instructions? I think, can they understand exactly what the instructions are? So when the will is designed, it may be a situation, and although I don't advocate for homemade wills, somebody else asked a question, can I print a will from the internet and sign it? So I have a huge concern around that, and I've shared it. But because we have Google and because we have access to pre-printed wills and getting them off the internet, you know, if somebody is a single person and they create their own will and they sign it and witness it and they follow by the letter of the law exactly how the instructions will tell them to do it, because any of the, you know, there are many portals where you can go in and find forms that you can, it'll prompt you, what's your name, what's the name of the beneficiary, what do you want to give them, and the more specific, you know, the form is, in not allowing you move further than the specific answer, it is possible to do that. I just caution against people not reading the detail of how the will would be done. In the situation that you described there, Evie, and that other question, it may be that something like that somebody's more comfortable doing directly with the person, so it's very clear what they're, what they're doing and filling in the form themselves. But I have to caution people with, when they're, you know, the instructions that come with making any will that you'd be downloading from Google, there's no reason it couldn't be valid if it's executed correctly, but just to be very careful as to the specific requirements of what makes a will lawful. Writing it, you know, a writing is needed for its validity. Therefore, the oral and explaining and the video or the, you know, the audio tape would be problematic. Wouldn't be deemed to be a will.
Okay, thank you for that, Sharon. Rebecca, I might bring you in for another question. There's one of the audience members said that they have a death book that sets out their wishes, but they never thought of the process of actually dying. So it's kind of good to start off the thinking process. But they asked, how do I approach this subject with my parents so that they can prepare?
With caution. I think, as Jennifer said, don't prepare yourself for one conversation. Prepare yourself for a lot of small conversations. But also, I'm a huge advocate for the power of an open question. So you could say something, Mom, if you were ever in hospital and really sick, how would you like me to speak? If I had to speak on your behalf, what would you like me to say? So it's actually posing the questions rather than yes or no. Hey, Mom, do you want to talk about dying? That's not going to work for any of us. But, hey, Mom, if you were sick, what might you want to happen? And have you decided, if someone had to speak on your behalf, who that person might be? And I'm cool that it might not be me. It could be someone else, one of your friends. But did you know I was at this talk the other night, and they were talking about the super book, Think Ahead. We'll leave it there on the coffee table, and we could come back and discuss it if you ever want to. So it's kind of nudging the door open and showing that you're open to having a conversation, because we hear from the other side, from, say, the parents, saying, I'm okay to talk about this, but the kids go, no, Mum, you're not going to die, don't be morbid. So I think all of us, you know, Jen said yesterday, it's a bit like talking about sex, and it really is. It's kind of, we're back to that uncomfortable conversation again. We're back to, and again, my advice is get in the car. lock the doors like you do with teenagers, lock the doors and have a conversation, because then there's less distraction. You're going somewhere and you can just have a chat. Hey mom, I was watching this. Or EastEnders, watch EastEnders, because the poor creators on EastEnders are always, bad things are happening to them, and you can say, oh, if that happened to us, what would you like? You know, genuinely, it's trying to pull from what's around you rather than sitting down and having the talk, because we know with teenagers having the talk doesn't work. So it's trying to incrementally chat about things as you go on, and then when you get to that point, oh, will we write it all down? We may as well. Got this book. Oh, I happen to have this book. So yeah.
Thanks, Rebecca. Sharon, did you want to come in there as well?
I just wanted to add that one of the things that came up yesterday when we were in the room was about, was the idea that even though you have specific wishes, those that you want to charge with the wishes that you have for yourself, they may not get them. They may be more traditionalist. They may not be able to take them on board. So I think the importance of having, just having compassion, that, as Jennifer said, it's just not one sentence, or, as Rebecca said, there is a journey into it. So hence the reason, that when we say, let's talk about death, it's not let's solve the problem tonight. It's let's begin to start talking about it, like the Death Cafe would do, because the more that people share their views, you get to go, oh, now I know why they wouldn't want that. Or, so it is important that we, the deciders, also have compassion upon what we're putting upon other people for us, when we may be not in a situation to talk for ourselves, or now saying, I want you to do it, and understand the challenges they may have sometimes in trying to bring it about. Because in Rebecca's information earlier, we all want to die at home, and we all want to be minded, and we want it to be easy, but 40%, I think, if I recall what Rebecca had, it's in hospital. So it may be out of our control, and it may be very difficult for family to sort of struggling to put in place in the environment what it is that we want them to do. So fill the form, but there's compassion on both sides, I think, as well.
Thank you. I think this whole session has just been so good for me as well, in terms of practical advice and different things, because I think a lot of Irish people especially, we have this sure, be grand attitude, but now as you're unpacking it, I'm kind of thinking, oh yeah, we would be grand, but then I'm thinking, okay, maybe not. So it's really, really useful. So thank you for that. Jennifer, I know I asked you this yesterday, but just for the people who are here this evening, if you could talk more about the mushroom suits and where they might be available, how they might be available, a little bit more about that, because I think that's brilliant, and especially with the climate and the current climate crisis that we have at the moment.
Sure. Well, there's, and we could do a whole session on this about sort of the greening and alternative funeral spaces. And I think perhaps the unfortunate changes that we have had in our world, including COVID, over the last couple of years, have made us more conscious about where we're living, what's happening to our planet, and what kind of legacy we want to leave behind us. And all of those changes affect the way that we look at disposal of the human body. So it used to be, really strictly just burial. About the last 20 to 30 years, we've had options for cremation, and they are certainly expanding in the Republic. And actually the demand for cremation is rising and rising year upon year. But there are people who might want some alternatives to that. So the mushroom suit that I pictured in my presentation is just that. You are, once you're dead, you are buried without any additional clothing on underneath, or with clothing that is only biodegradable, okay? The mushroom suit is then placed on you, and it's impregnated with mushroom, I don't have the right word, but seeds, for lack of a better word. And that is how you are placed in the ground. There's no coffin or casket or lining or anything. And because this suit is like impregnated with these mushrooms, it's supposed to help your body compost more quickly and more naturally than it would if you were buried in a traditional way. So like I said in the presentation, there's some feedback around this innovation that says maybe it doesn't work in quite the way that it purports itself to. but it's certainly an option. The name of the company, and when you're chatting with somebody else, I'll Google it and put it in a thing, but I'm almost certain it's Coelho or Coelho, Coelo, but I'll Google it and put it in the chat for people who are interested. There's also an Italian company called Capsula Mundi, and they will provide, they're doing pilots of almost like an egg-shaped, what would you call it? Almost like a bulb that your body would be inserted into naked, no clothes. So you came in naked and you go out naked, and it grows into a tree. And that is how your body is broken down and composted. So a tree literally grows up out of your body. Lots of different and new ways to look at what we do with our bodies after we don't need them here anymore. And I really think they fit with a feminist perspective and with sort of a new way to recognize that, you know, really what do we want to leave behind after us? Not much of us, and maybe a little bit more of kind of the good memories and the good things and the good works that we've done, but a little bit less of our physicality, if you will. I don't know, does that answer it for you, Evie, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Thanks so
okay.
much.
I'll get Googling on that company.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jennifer. I suppose this question is for everyone. What's the most common question that you get asked in your different fields? And if you could say the question and maybe answer it. If anyone wants to jump in first.
Gosh, that's a hard one.
There isn't a question that you might all kind of get, or you get a lot, or anything like that?
I get one piece of feedback every year. So I teach at Technological University of the Shannon, and I teach in the final year social care degree program there. And the first semester that I have them, this semester, the autumn semester, the theme is loss and grief. And I tell everybody this up front. Invariably, I get feedback from students saying, why are we doing this now? Why do we have to talk about this? It's too sad. It's too depressing. I don't think that we need to know about this. You know, my answer back is like, you're going out to work with vulnerable people as social care professionals who are going to be in the depths of trauma and loss. So if you kind of don't tease out your own stuff first and learn a little bit about some of the theory and the literature that's out there, you know, how you're going to turn off that conversation and not be able to adequately support them. So that's probably the number one reaction I get. Usually by the end of the semester or the following semester, they've kind of turned it around and they can see the value of talking about this kind of stuff, but it's a hard sell in the beginning. I don't know if Sharon or Rebecca or Anne get that.
I do. So often when I walk into a room, everybody else walks out. So because people know what I do. So sometimes you get that head tilt, oh, you know, oh gosh, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And then, but what's really interesting is when we should all sometimes put a big badge on ourselves. I don't know if older people remember when there was once this, it was like Slim Fast, and people used to wear badges saying, ask me questions about Slim Fast. It was like a diet thing years ago. And sometimes I think if we're open to talk about death and dying, we should wear a badge saying, I'm open to talk about this, because it's amazing when people know. Like my door in the house here, sometimes it's like a revolving door. People constantly coming in just for a little chat, to ask a little bit of advice. Because to be honest, we don't talk about it enough, and there's not enough information out there. So it's kind of, it's almost a self prophecy thing, that because we don't talk about it, it becomes worse. So then when the people who aren't talking about it, people kind of come and talk to you a little bit. So I use a lot of humour, and I think Jen and Sharon do, and Anne actually. I think we're all on the right side of humour, because you can't do our job if you don't have that ability to be able to smile and laugh and bring together those, because who's like funerals, there's always crack going on in a funeral. So, you know, it really is, it's finding the little diamonds in the midst of the darkness. That's a bit verbally, sorry, it's a bit late.
And
I apologise.
I'm going to add something, that one of the most common, it's more of a statement that people make, and you'll understand this because it's about your field, is people say, oh, the state will take my house. And there's a huge misnomer, a huge misconception of what the fair deal scheme is. So therefore, if you don't move on the property, that the state will come along and take it, because it's a bit like you're sitting in a bed in a nursing home and nobody will see, somebody will come along with a dark cloak and take it. And I'll share the story why it's interesting. So that's why what you mentioned earlier, Anne, about the new legislation, I'm only beginning to digest it. I'm thinking how great it is for the housing crisis that people now, if that's the situation, presumably that's why it has come about. But I met with a couple who had their daughter with them, who insisted on sitting in the rooms. We're having a general chat, and Mammy is saying, I want to transfer my house to my daughter. Now the daughter lives in England, she's clearly in England. There's 2 other sons, but the daughter is clearly the one who's taking charge, but she's living in England, no intention of moving to Ireland. And Mammy goes, I will be in a nursing home. My mother was, and her mother's mother, so I'm going to a nursing home. I never hear that. I always hear I want to be at home, although that may not be what happens. And Daddy didn't have much to say, and he's going along with whatever Mammy says. And the daughter is insistent, no, they're transferring the house because the state will take it. And it's very much a, no, I know, I've read about it. And I said, well, that might be happening in the UK, but that's not here. And I couldn't let them do it because they would be vulnerable. And you know, for this came up in a big conversation yesterday, you know, but I knew when I was writing that, oh, we'll think about it. Yes, I'll take them home. I'll read all the information. I knew I would never see that couple again, because the daughter wasn't necessarily getting what she wished, that the house would be transferred in a lifetime, despite she saying, well, look, but I'll sell it after, I mean, I'll sell it when I get it in time, and I'll divide it with my brothers, Maria. So it's interesting to me that at least with the sale of a house after somebody is in care, if they are, and that the property can be freed up without the penalties that heretofore were there. And I have to think, I don't know, do you think, Anne, I have to think that that would be helpful in the climate where we are at the moment, where there's cost to mind a house, keep it empty, and where somebody is okay with it being sold.
Yeah, I think in fairness, that's why it was brought in. But also it was a penalty if people did sell their house. They'd already paid the 3-year cap on the house. So now, because, you know, they wanted to move things on, and why would they leave the derelict house? They were being penalised. So that it was unfair, you know. So it is one of the reasons why it happened. And you're perfectly right. While, you know, I give talks and people are very interested. And I suppose it's, when you hear it the first time, you have to hear it a few times. And it's like a lot of things, you have to go through it yourself to understand it. But definitely at the end of a lot of talks, you do get the question about, will they take my house? And you've tried your level best to explain. But look, it's good. And I suppose prior to COVID, we were getting out to a lot of care groups and different groups. There's been not as many during COVID, but look, it's great to be started again. And in fairness, this was a great opportunity. And for those participants today, but I have to say, we all felt enlivened by being live yesterday. And as I don't know, was it Jennifer or Rebecca said, standing up, making a presentation rather than sitting down. So yeah, it's been good to open the conversation, and I suppose it links all the pieces around end of life, care, death, dying, progression, you know, it's all good.
Thanks, Anne. I think we've answered all of the questions in the Q&A box. So I suppose if anyone has any closing remarks that they want to make just before we call it a night, you're welcome to do so.
I think I'm just going to add, if we always do what we've always done, we're going to continue to get the same result. So if we don't talk about death and dying, and we don't talk about planning ahead, we're going to have what we've had in traditional Ireland, just silence, and then conflict and contention and ambiguity. So yeah, let's start new. And I think we've all said in our presentations that women very much, you know, are integral in being part of. We are the nurturers, we're the conversationalists, we are the carers and the communicators. So I think we stand in a really good position, and particularly as Rebecca has said, we're very strategic in terms of how to nudge a conversation and bring it up. So I just think maybe this is the start of something great in the Midwest in terms of encouraging the women in families, and even if it's a single household with one mother and one child, you know, encouraging these conversations forward in the family and within the community.
Thanks, Sharon. Anyone else want to come in? Okay. I think we will leave it at that if no one else wants to come in. Just to say again, thank you so much to Anne, Jennifer, Sharon and Rebecca for speaking at the event yesterday and again this evening. Big thanks to Shelley and Catherine, our ISL interpreters, and of course thank you to everyone who attended this evening. We really appreciate you being here. We're hoping that this will be the start of something that we can kind of grow and do more sessions, informative, practical sessions for women. We think it's something really important, and if we get good feedback, it's absolutely something that we want to do. People have asked about presentations and recordings, so hopefully the recording will have gone okay and we can make that available to everyone in a few weeks. Lastly, just to again say thank you to our sponsors, and I put in the chat there's lots of ways that you can keep connected with the Limerick Women's Network, so please do, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks again everybody, and we will see you again soon hopefully.
Thanks, Edie.
Thank you.